My 7 years of marriage destroyed in 1 month. My wife moved in with our neighbor, but that was just the beginning. When I discovered what he was really doing, it changed everything. The day my life changed forever started like any other. I'm Thomas Barrett, 35, and until recently, I thought I had built an unshakable foundation for my life. As a structural engineer for one of Boston's leading architectural firms, I spent my days ensuring buildings could withstand any storm. Ironic, considering I never saw the tempest coming that would tear my own life apart. My wife Rachel and I had been married for 7 years. We met during our final year at MIT. She was studying photography while I was completing my engineering degree. The contrast between our interests had always been part of our charm. While I calculated load-bearing capacities and stress points, she captured the world through her lens, finding beauty in unexpected places. Our love story had begun in the depths of a New England winter. I'd been rushing across campus, head down against the biting wind, when I quite literally ran into her. She'd been photographing ice crystals forming on tree branches, so absorbed in her work she hadn't noticed me approaching. The collision sent her camera tumbling into a snowbank. After helping her retrieve it and checking it wasn't damaged, I insisted on buying her coffee as an apology. One coffee turned into 3 hours of conversation, and by the time we left the cafe, the sun had long since set. We married 2 years after graduation in a small ceremony on Cape Cod. Rachel wore a vintage dress she'd found in a thrift store, and I surprised her by having her favorite local band play at the reception. We bought a brownstone in Back Bay that needed work but had potential. Weekends were spent stripping paint, refinishing hardwood floors, and turning the basement into her darkroom. We talked about having children someday, but agreed to wait until we were more established in our careers. Everything changed when Rachel landed her dream job at the prestigious Griffin Gallery. The position came with everything she'd ever wanted: creative freedom, resources for her own work, and connections in the art world. I was thrilled for her, even if it meant longer hours and frequent weekend events. The gallery director, Marcus Chun, seemed to recognize her talent immediately, giving her increasing responsibility and visibility within Boston's art scene. Marcus was everything I wasn't: cultured, sophisticated, and deeply embedded in the world Rachel loved. At 40, he'd already made a name for himself in the international art community, turning the Griffin from a regional gallery into a destination for collectors worldwide. His presence became a constant thread in Rachel's stories about work. Marcus loved her latest series. Marcus was featuring her in the upcoming show. Marcus thought she should apply for a prestigious fellowship. The first crack in our foundation appeared so subtly I almost missed it. Rachel began spending more time at the gallery, claiming she needed the special lighting setup for her new project. She started attending more evening events, networking dinners, and weekend art fairs. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from Marcus about exhibition details and gallery business. I told myself this was normal, that she was simply growing in her career. Then came the small changes in her behavior. She grew protective of her phone, always keeping it face down. Her stories about work became vaguer, less detailed. She spent more time in her darkroom, claiming she needed solitude to process her latest ideas. The intimate moments we'd always shared: morning coffee on our tiny balcony, weekend walks along the Charles River, evening discussions about our days, began to fade away. The turning point came during the gallery's annual benefit gala. I'd been looking forward to it, seeing it as a chance to reconnect with Rachel and her world. She'd been especially distant in the weeks leading up to the event, consumed with preparation and planning. The night of the gala, she wore a black dress I'd never seen before, her dark hair swept up elegantly. She looked stunning, but somehow different, as if she'd styled herself for someone else's gaze. Throughout the evening, I watched as she and Marcus moved through the crowd together. They worked in perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences as they spoke with donors and collectors. There was an electricity between them, a current of unspoken understanding that made me feel like an outsider. The way she leaned in when he spoke, the lingering touches as they passed drinks or exhibition catalogs, the private smiles they shared, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see. Later that night, I found myself standing alone in our bedroom, staring at Rachel's open laptop on her desk. She'd left her email open, and Marcus's name filled her inbox. Something made me scroll through the messages. Most were innocent enough, discussions about exhibitions, artwork, gallery business. But then I saw it, a thread of late-night messages, personal rather than professional. They discussed art, yes, but also life, dreams, desires. The kind of intimate conversations that should have been happening between husband and wife, not boss and employee. The next morning, I confronted Rachel with what I'd found. She didn't deny it. Instead, she broke down and admitted that her feelings for Marcus had grown beyond professional admiration. They hadn't acted on anything physically, she insisted, but the emotional connection was undeniable. She claimed to be confused, torn between her marriage and these new feelings she couldn't ignore. The next few weeks passed in a blur of pain and disbelief. Rachel suggested marriage counseling, but her heart wasn't in it. She continued working at the gallery, continued seeing Marcus daily, while I tried to hold on to the shreds of our relationship. But with each passing day, the distance between us grew wider. The final blow came when Rachel announced she'd been offered a chance to curate a major exhibition in New York. It would mean 3 months away, working closely with Marcus, who would be overseeing the project. She presented it as a career opportunity, but we both knew what it really meant. This was her way of choosing. I didn't wait for her to leave for New York. Instead, I packed my things and moved into a temporary apartment downtown. I filed for divorce the next day. Rachel didn't contest it, perhaps realizing that our marriage had ended long before the papers were signed. Months have passed since then. I've heard through mutual friends that Rachel and Marcus are now officially together. They're planning to open their own gallery in Manhattan. Sometimes I drive past our old brownstone, now sold to a young couple starting their own story. The darkroom equipment is gone, replaced by a nursery, according to our old neighbors. I've thrown myself into my work, taking on challenging projects that require all my focus and energy. On weekends, I've started rock climbing. Something about the precise calculations required, the need to find stable points of support, helps clear my mind. I've even started dating again, cautiously. Sarah, a civil engineer I met through work, understands my world in a way Rachel never did. We're taking things slow, building a foundation based on shared interests and honest communication. Looking back, I realize that love, like the buildings I design, requires more than just an initial strong foundation. It needs constant maintenance, attention to small cracks before they become structural failures, and most importantly, 2 people equally committed to keeping it standing. Rachel and I had built something beautiful, but we'd failed to maintain it. She'd found a new blueprint for her life, one that didn't include me. In the end, I've learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from a structure that's no longer sound. There's no shame in starting over, in building something new with the wisdom gained from past collapse. My story isn't over. It's just being rebuilt, one careful calculation at a time. The reconstruction of my life took an unexpected turn 6 months after the divorce. While reviewing plans for a new sustainable office complex downtown, I received an urgent email from Marcus's former assistant at the Griffin Gallery. Her message revealed something that shook the very foundation of what I thought I knew about Rachel and Marcus's relationship. According to the assistant, the prestigious New York exhibition had been fabricated, a carefully orchestrated excuse to transition Rachel to Manhattan. The real story involved the gallery's financial troubles that Marcus had been hiding from everyone, including the board of directors. Rachel hadn't just been his romantic interest. She had unknowingly become entangled in his elaborate scheme to siphon money from the gallery through falsified art acquisitions and inflated exhibition budgets. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those late nights at the gallery, the endless meetings about budgets and acquisitions, they hadn't just been covers for their affair. They had been part of something far more sinister. The assistant had discovered discrepancies in the gallery's financial records and had been quietly gathering evidence. She'd reached out to me because she was preparing to report everything to the board and the authorities, and she thought I deserved to know the truth. My first instinct was to warn Rachel. Despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of her facing legal consequences for Marcus's actions. But before I could reach out, the story broke in the Boston Globe. The headline was devastating. Prestigious Griffin Gallery under investigation for financial fraud. Marcus had disappeared, leaving Rachel to face the fallout alone. Sarah, my new girlfriend, urged me to stay out of it. She argued that it wasn't my problem anymore, that getting involved would only drag me back into a past I'd worked hard to escape. Her logic was sound, but she didn't understand the complicated web of emotions that still tied me to Rachel. Despite the pain of her betrayal, I couldn't simply stand by and watch her life implode. I reached out to my cousin James, a criminal defense attorney specializing in white-collar crime. He agreed to review Rachel's case pro bono as a favor to me. The evidence he uncovered was both damning and exculpatory. While Rachel's signature appeared on numerous suspicious documents, the paper trail clearly showed that Marcus had been the architect of the scheme. Rachel had been careless, perhaps willfully blind, but not deliberately complicit. The investigation revealed that Marcus had a history of similar schemes at other galleries across the country. He would gain control of struggling institutions, manipulate their finances while courting wealthy donors, then disappear just before his fraud was discovered. Rachel had been both his unwitting accomplice and his latest victim, chosen not just for her artistic talent, but for her trusting nature and her access to the gallery's operations. When I finally saw Rachel again, it was at the courthouse during her initial hearing. She looked nothing like the confident, vibrant woman who had left me for a new life in New York. Her face was drawn, her artistic flair replaced by a conservative suit that seemed to swallow her whole. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom, and the weight of unspoken words hung between us. Through James's skillful defense and Rachel's cooperation with the investigation, she was eventually cleared of criminal charges. The board chose not to pursue civil action against her, perhaps recognizing that she too had been deceived. Marcus remained at large, his whereabouts unknown, though rumors placed him everywhere from South America to Southeast Asia. The aftermath of the scandal forced me to confront complicated truths about my failed marriage. Rachel's affair with Marcus hadn't been the simple story of a wife falling for another man. She had been manipulated by someone who recognized her vulnerabilities, her desire for artistic recognition, her need for validation in a world she desperately wanted to belong to. It didn't excuse her choices, but it added layers of complexity to what I'd thought was a clear-cut betrayal. My relationship with Sarah evolved during this period, tested by my continued emotional investment in Rachel's situation. Unlike Rachel, Sarah approached life with a mathematician's precision. She understood my need for closure, but struggled to understand why I couldn't simply apply logic to matters of the heart. Our discussions about the situation led to deeper conversations about trust, forgiveness, and the gray areas that exist in all human relationships. A year after the scandal, I received a letter from Rachel. She had moved to Seattle, about as far from the East Coast art scene as she could get while staying in the continental United States. She was teaching photography at a community college, finding unexpected joy in sharing her passion with students who approached art with fresh, unjaded eyes. The letter wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was simply an acknowledgement of our shared past and an attempt to make peace with it. I kept the letter, but never responded. Some chapters need to remain closed, even when new understanding casts them in a different light. Sarah and I moved in together, merging our lives in a way that felt both pragmatic and romantic. We bought a modern loft in South End, its clean lines and open spaces a stark contrast to the historic brownstone I'd shared with Rachel. Life has a way of coming full circle. 2 years after the Griffin Gallery scandal, I was assigned to oversee the structural renovation of an old warehouse being converted into a contemporary art space. During the initial walkthrough, I found myself studying the building's bones with new appreciation. Like relationships, buildings can appear solid while hiding structural weaknesses. But with proper inspection and care, even the most damaged structure can be reinforced, made stronger than before. The art space opened last month. Sarah and I attended the inaugural exhibition, her hand steady in mine as we walked through galleries that I had helped make safe and secure. One of the featured photographs caught my eye, a black and white image of a partially demolished building, its exposed beams reaching toward the sky like desperate fingers. The plaque listed the photographer as R. Barrett. I stood before the image for a long time, Sarah quietly by my side. The photograph captured something profound about destruction and renewal, about the beauty that can emerge from collapse. In that moment, I finally understood that some things need to break apart completely before they can be rebuilt into something stronger, something truer to their essential nature. My phone buzzed, a text from the contractor about our next project, a restoration of a historic theater downtown. Sarah squeezed my hand, and we moved on to the next gallery. Behind us, Rachel's photograph remained on the wall, a testament to the fact that art, like life, finds meaning not just in what is created, but in what remains after everything else falls away. 6 months after seeing Rachel's photograph at the gallery opening, my life took another unexpected turn. The historic theater restoration project had grown into something much bigger than initially planned. During the renovation, we discovered hidden architectural elements that dated back to the 1920s, including an elaborate underground speakeasy that had been sealed off for decades. The find attracted national attention, and suddenly our firm was being featured in architecture magazines and historical preservation journals. The publicity brought an unexpected visitor to my office one rainy Tuesday morning. A man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, introduced himself as Gerald Chin, Marcus's father. The resemblance was striking, though where Marcus had exuded charm and easy confidence, Gerald carried himself with a gravity that spoke of old money and older regrets. Gerald had come with a purpose. He had spent the past 2 years tracking his son's activities across multiple countries, piecing together a pattern of fraud that stretched back much further than anyone had suspected. Marcus, it seemed, had been running similar schemes since his early 20s, using his father's reputation in the art world to gain access to galleries and museums across 3 continents. The Griffin Gallery had just been his most ambitious target. What Gerald revealed next stunned me. He had finally located Marcus in Buenos Aires, living under an assumed name and planning his next scheme. But Marcus wasn't alone. He was working with someone I knew, Diana Wells, Rachel's mentor from her college days at MIT. The same Diana who had recommended her for the position at Griffin Gallery. The same Diana who had introduced her to Marcus at a gallery event years ago. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rachel's entire career trajectory, including our chance meeting at MIT, might have been orchestrated as part of a long-term con. Gerald had evidence suggesting Diana had been Marcus's partner in previous schemes, using her position in academia to identify and groom potential Marks. Young, talented artists desperate for recognition and success. Sarah, ever practical, suggested taking the information to the FBI. But Gerald had a different proposition. He wanted to set up a sting operation, using his connections in the art world to lure Marcus and Diana out of hiding. His plan centered around a fake exhibition of recently discovered modernist masterpieces, exactly the kind of high-stakes event that would attract their attention. He needed someone they wouldn't suspect to act as the face of the project. He needed me. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. I was an engineer, not an undercover operative. My life with Sarah was stable, predictable, safe. But another part of me, the part that still woke up at night wondering if any part of my relationship with Rachel had been real, wanted answers. Sarah was firmly against it. We had our first major fight over my decision to help Gerald. She couldn't understand why I would risk everything we'd built together to chase ghosts from my past. The argument ended with her walking out of our loft, leaving behind only the echo of her words. "You never really let go of her, did you?" The next 2 months were a blur of preparation. Gerald's connections in the art world were deep, and his resources seemed limitless. A fake gallery was set up in Vancouver, complete with a sophisticated security system and a carefully crafted backstory. My role was simple but crucial. I would pose as the structural engineer who had discovered the paintings during a renovation project, hidden in a sealed wall cavity. The story would be leaked to key art world figures, creating the kind of buzz that Marcus and Diana couldn't resist investigating. The plan worked almost too perfectly. Within weeks of the story breaking, Diana made contact through intermediaries, expressing interest in authenticating the find. She didn't recognize me. We had only met briefly at Rachel's gallery events, and my appearance had changed enough in the intervening years to pass as a stranger. Marcus, predictably, stayed in the background, but Gerald's investigators confirmed he had booked a flight to Vancouver. What no one expected was Rachel's involvement. She appeared at the gallery 2 days before the scheduled meeting with Diana, her press credentials for a Seattle arts magazine serving as her cover. One look at her face told me she had figured it out. She knew the gallery was a front. Instead of exposing us, however, she asked to help. She wanted to be there when Marcus and Diana were finally exposed. Needed to understand how much of her life had been manipulated. Sarah returned to our loft the night before the Vancouver operation was set to begin. She didn't apologize for walking out, and I didn't apologize for choosing to help Gerald. Instead, she handed me a small GPS tracking device, the kind used by hiking enthusiasts. "Just in case," she said, her engineer's mind always focusing on backup plans and fail-safes. The day of the sting arrived with a heavy Vancouver rain that seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. Rachel positioned herself in the gallery's coffee shop, pretending to work on her laptop. I stood in the main gallery space, reviewing fabricated structural reports as Gerald's security team monitored the situation from a nearby surveillance van. Diana arrived first, every inch the distinguished art professor, her silver hair and elegant clothes projecting authority and expertise. What happened next would later be described in court documents and newspaper articles, but living through it felt like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Marcus arrived through a back entrance, displaying the same confident smile I remembered from the Griffin Gallery. The trap was set, the evidence was in place, and justice was finally within reach. But life, as I had learned, rarely follows the expected blueprint. The carefully orchestrated sting operation exploded into chaos within minutes. Marcus had come prepared, having somehow discovered it was a setup. As federal agents moved in, he triggered the gallery's fire suppression system, filling the space with fog-like smoke. In the confusion, he and Diana attempted to escape through an emergency exit. What they hadn't counted on was Rachel. She had positioned herself near that very exit, anticipating their escape route with an intuition born from years of knowing how Marcus operated. As they burst through the door, she managed to capture clear photographs of them with the professional camera she'd brought along. These photos would later prove crucial in their prosecution, as they showed Marcus carrying stolen documents that linked him to other fraudulent schemes. The chase that followed through downtown Vancouver became front-page news. Marcus and Diana separated, each taking different routes through the rain-slicked streets. Diana was caught within an hour, her elegant outfit soaked and muddied as she attempted to hide in a construction site. Marcus proved more elusive, managing to disappear into the city's maze of alleys and side streets. But Sarah's GPS tracker, which I'd managed to slip into Marcus's jacket pocket during our brief interaction in the gallery, proved to be his undoing. The signal led authorities to the private marina where he kept an escape boat ready. He was apprehended just as he was attempting to cast off, his carefully crafted facade finally crumbling as the handcuffs clicked shut. The aftermath unfolded over several months. Diana, facing substantial prison time, agreed to cooperate with authorities. Her testimony revealed the full scope of their operation, including how they had systematically targeted promising young artists like Rachel. She confirmed my suspicions. Their initial meeting at MIT had been orchestrated, though Rachel's talent was genuine. They had seen her as the perfect combination of artistic skill and naive trust, someone they could use to add legitimacy to their schemes. Rachel struggled with this revelation. Learning that even her college mentor had been part of the deception forced her to question every achievement, every connection in her artistic career. She withdrew from the art world entirely for a time, returning to Seattle where she focused on teaching and her own photography, creating raw, honest work that reflected her journey through deception and discovery. Marcus and Diana both received lengthy prison sentences. Gerald, seeking to make amends for his son's actions, established a foundation to support young artists and help galleries implement stronger financial oversight measures. The art world began the slow process of examining itself, of questioning the systems that had allowed such elaborate deceptions to flourish. Sarah and I emerged from the experience changed but stronger. The night after the sting operation, as we sat in our Vancouver hotel room watching the rain, she confessed that her opposition to my involvement hadn't just been about safety. She had been afraid that helping Rachel would rekindle old feelings, that I would realize I wasn't over my ex-wife. Instead, working together to expose Marcus had given me the closure I needed. I could finally see Rachel not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as another victim of a complex deception, someone who had lost her way but found the strength to help make things right. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony on the rooftop of one of my recently completed buildings. Rachel sent a wedding gift, a black and white photograph of a bridge being built, its incomplete spans reaching toward each other across empty space. The note attached read simply, "Sometimes what's broken can lead to something stronger." 5 years have passed since the Vancouver sting. Sarah and I have a daughter now, a precocious 3-year-old who loves building towers with blocks almost as much as she loves knocking them down. Rachel has found success on her own terms, her post-scandal work earning critical acclaim for its authenticity and emotional depth. We keep in touch occasionally through holiday cards and social media, maintaining a careful distance that respects our shared past while acknowledging our separate futures. Marcus was recently denied parole, his attempt at showing remorse undermined by evidence that he had been trying to orchestrate investment schemes from within prison. Diana, after serving 3 years, was released and now works with law enforcement, helping to identify and prevent art fraud. Gerald continues his work with the foundation, turning his family's shame into a force for positive change in the art world. As for me, I've learned that life's blueprints are never fixed. The structures we build, whether physical buildings or relationships, must be able to withstand unexpected stresses and adapt to changing conditions. My firm now specializes in adaptive reuse projects, finding ways to preserve historical structures while reimagining their purpose for the future. There's something poetic about that, about the way old wounds can become new foundations. Last week, I received an envelope from Seattle. Inside was a photograph of Rachel's latest exhibition, a series exploring themes of deception, redemption, and rebuilding. In the center was an image of the Vancouver Gallery where everything had come to a head, now renovated into a community arts center. The building still stands, its scars from that rainy day hidden beneath fresh paint and new purpose, a testament to the resilience of things that bend but don't break. Looking at that photo, I realized that our stories never really end. They just transform, like buildings being reimagined for new purposes, carrying the weight of their history while reaching toward whatever comes next. Sarah found me studying the photograph and wrapped her arms around me, her pregnant belly pressing against my back. Above us, our daughter's laughter echoed from her playroom, where she was undoubtedly creating and destroying worlds of her own. Some structures fall, others rise from the rubble. The trick, I've learned, is knowing which foundations are worth saving and having the courage to build something new on top of them. 10 years after Vancouver, life threw another unexpected curve. My firm had grown significantly, specializing in historically sensitive renovations with a focus on sustainability. We'd just won a major contract to restore a series of century-old warehouses in Chicago's West Loop when an urgent email arrived from Gerald Chun. Marcus had died in prison. The news itself wasn't entirely surprising. Marcus had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer months earlier. What was surprising was what came after. He had left behind a series of detailed journals, documenting every scheme, every manipulation, every piece of stolen art over his 20-year career. More importantly, he had documented the locations of dozens of valuable artworks that had disappeared during his various cons. Gerald wanted my help one last time. The journals contained architectural details about the buildings where Marcus had hidden the artwork, false walls, secret rooms, modified ventilation systems. As both an engineer and someone familiar with Marcus's methods, I was uniquely qualified to help recover these lost pieces. Sarah, now pregnant with our third child, surprised me by encouraging me to take on this final chapter of the Marcus Chun saga. Our eldest daughter was 7, already showing signs of both her mother's analytical mind and my fascination with how things fit together. Our 5-year-old son was pure energy, constantly in motion. The timing wasn't ideal, but Sarah understood that this was about more than just finding lost art. It was about making final amends, about turning Marcus's legacy of destruction into something positive. The recovery project took us across 3 continents. Rachel became involved as well, her photography documenting the process of discovery and restoration. She had remarried 2 years earlier to a restoration specialist she met during a project in Prague, and her understanding of both the art world and Marcus's methods proved invaluable. The most dramatic discovery came in an abandoned palazzo outside Venice. Marcus's journals described a hidden room behind what appeared to be a solid marble wall. Using ground-penetrating radar and carefully studying the building's original plans, we located the space. Inside, we found not only several missing masterpieces but also evidence of an even larger conspiracy, one that implicated several prominent figures in the international art world. Diana, who had been working with art crime investigators since her release, helped us understand the broader implications of what we'd found. Marcus's operation hadn't been just about personal gain. It had been part of a sophisticated network of art theft and fraud that had operated with impunity for decades. The evidence we uncovered led to a series of high-profile arrests and the recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stolen art. As we worked, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since the days when I first met Rachel at MIT. Our children, mine with Sarah, Rachel's young daughter with her new husband played together during family dinners while we discussed the progress of the recovery project. The past's sharp edges had been worn smooth by time and understanding, allowing us to build something new from the ruins of what had been lost. The project lasted 18 months. By the time it concluded, Sarah had given birth to our third child, a boy we named Gerald, in honor of the man who had helped us bring truth to light. The art world had been shaken to its foundations by the revelations from Marcus's journals, leading to major reforms in how galleries and museums verified provenance and conducted transactions. Rachel's documentary photography of the recovery project became her most acclaimed work yet, earning her a Guggenheim Fellowship and major exhibitions in New York, London, and Paris. Her images captured not just the physical process of discovery but the human story behind it. The way truth, like art, can be hidden away but never truly lost. The final piece we recovered was found in an unlikely place, a small church in Boston's North End, just blocks from where my story with Rachel had begun. Behind a newer wall, added during renovations in the 1980s, we found a remarkable early American portrait that had disappeared from a museum in Philadelphia decades earlier. The discovery felt like a bookend, bringing everything full circle. As we stood in the church that day, watching the conservation team carefully extract the painting, I felt a deep sense of completion. Sarah stood beside me, our youngest asleep in his carrier, while Rachel photographed the process. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the ancient floors, reminding me that beauty can emerge from the darkest places. Later that evening, as our extended families gathered to celebrate the project's completion, I watched our children playing together and marveled at life's strange geometry. The lines that connect us are rarely straight, often doubling back on themselves, creating patterns we can only understand in retrospect. The wounds that Marcus and Diana had inflicted had, in their way, led to healing and connections that might never have existed otherwise. Gerald Chen, now in his late 70s but still sharp as ever, raised a toast to new beginnings. Diana, who had become an unlikely but valued friend, shared stories about the art world's ongoing transformation. Sarah and Rachel's husband discussed the technical challenges of preservation, while Rachel captured candid moments with her ever-present camera. As the evening wound down, Rachel showed me her last photograph from the church, a shaft of colored light illuminating the empty space where the hidden painting had waited all those years to be found. In the image, dust motes danced in the light like stars, creating a galaxy of possibilities in that small, sacred space. Some things, Rachel said, are meant to stay hidden until exactly the right moment to be found. She was right, of course. Every building I've worked on, every relationship I've built or rebuilt, has had its own timing, its own moment of revelation. The trick isn't just knowing which foundations to save, but understanding that some discoveries can only come when we're ready to make them. The peaceful resolution of the Marcus Chen saga lasted exactly 8 months. On a crisp autumn morning, while reviewing plans for a new sustainable housing project, I received an urgent call from Diana. Her voice trembled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify as she shared the impossible. Marcus was alive. The body in the prison, the one we'd all believed was Marcus, belonged to another inmate. Through a complex series of bribes and identity switches, Marcus had orchestrated his own death, using his terminal cancer diagnosis as cover. The discovery came after facial recognition software at a Dubai airport flagged someone matching his description, traveling under a false passport. The revelation hit Gerald hardest. The journals, the hidden art, the entire recovery project. It had all been part of an elaborate misdirection. While we were chasing his breadcrumb trail of stolen art across Europe, Marcus had been methodically accessing long-dormant accounts and moving assets we hadn't known existed. The recovered artworks were real, but they were simply the ones he'd been willing to sacrifice to maintain his deception. Sarah, now an adjunct professor at MIT School of Architecture alongside her work at our firm, approached the situation with analytical precision. She pointed out that Marcus's death had coincided perfectly with a series of high-profile digital art heists, NFTs, and digital assets disappearing from supposedly secure blockchain platforms. It was a new frontier for art theft, one that merged Marcus's understanding of the art world with cutting-edge technology. Rachel's response surprised everyone. Instead of retreating from the revelation that her documentary project had unknowingly participated in Marcus's deception, she chose to lean into it. She began working on a new series that explored the intersection of truth, deception, and digital reality. Her exhibitions now featured both traditional photographs and NFTs, each piece questioning the nature of authenticity in an increasingly virtual world. Diana, driven by guilt over her unwitting role in Marcus's latest con, dedicated herself to tracking his digital footprint. Her expertise in both traditional art fraud and cybersecurity made her uniquely qualified to understand how he might be adapting his old methods to this new digital landscape. She moved into a small apartment near our home in Boston, converting her living room into a command center of monitors and servers. As for me, I found myself drawn back into the investigation, but this time with a different perspective. My work in sustainable architecture had led me to explore the emerging world of digital twin technology, creating virtual replicas of physical buildings for better management and maintenance. The skills needed to understand these complex digital structures weren't so different from those required to track the movement of digital assets across the blockchain. The hunt for Marcus took us deep into the world of cryptocurrency exchanges, NFT marketplaces, and decentralized finance. Our teenage daughter, Emma, proved unexpectedly helpful, her generation's intuitive understanding of digital spaces providing insights that often eluded the rest of us. She spent her summer internship helping Diana map cryptocurrency transactions, showing the same meticulous attention to detail that had drawn me to engineering. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Gerald's foundation had recently funded a project to create digital archives of historically significant buildings threatened by climate change. One of the architectural students working on the project noticed something odd. Certain buildings in the database had subtle discrepancies in their digital models, differences that would be meaningless to most observers, but could serve as a sophisticated way to hide encrypted data. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. The discrepancies aligned perfectly with modifications Marcus had made to buildings in his previous schemes. He wasn't just stealing digital art. He was using the digital twins of real buildings to hide his tracks, embedding his stolen assets in plain sight within architectural databases around the world. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Marcus had taken the principles I used to strengthen and preserve buildings and perverted them into tools for hiding his crimes. Yet in doing so, he had inadvertently created a map we could follow, if you knew where to look and what to look for. Rachel's husband, the restoration specialist, proved invaluable in this new phase of the investigation. His understanding of historical architecture helped us identify which buildings Marcus was most likely to target for his digital hiding places. Together, we began to unravel a pattern that stretched across continents, each discovered location revealing new pieces of Marcus's digital empire. As we delved deeper into this virtual labyrinth, our personal lives continued to evolve. Sarah and I welcomed our fourth child, a daughter who arrived during a late-night session analyzing blockchain transactions. Diana found unexpected romance with a cybersecurity expert who'd been consulting on the case. Rachel's work exploring the intersection of physical and digital art earned her a prestigious position at the Museum of Modern Art's new Digital Arts division. But perhaps the most significant change came in my relationship with Gerald. As we worked together to track his son's digital footprints, he began sharing stories about Marcus's childhood, painting a picture of a brilliant but troubled boy who had always felt the need to prove himself against his father's legacy. It helped me understand that the foundations of Marcus's deceptions had been laid long before any of us had entered his life. The case took an unexpected turn when Emma discovered something in the code of a recently archived building in Singapore. Hidden within the digital twins data structure was a message, encoded in a way that only someone intimately familiar with both architectural software and Marcus's methods would recognize. It wasn't just a hiding place for stolen assets, it was a challenge, directed specifically at me. The message contained coordinates for 20 buildings around the world, each one holding a piece of what Marcus called his digital masterpiece. He had created an elaborate puzzle, combining elements of architectural history, engineering principles, and blockchain technology. Each building's digital twin contained encrypted data that, when combined properly, would reveal something he claimed would reshape the art world forever. Sarah immediately recognized it as a trap. Marcus had always been theatrical in his schemes, and this had all the hallmarks of an elaborate setup. But Gerald saw something different in his son's digital breadcrumbs, a desire for recognition, for someone to finally appreciate the complexity of his deceptions. Diana, drawing on her years of understanding Marcus's psychology, suggested it might be both. The first building on the list was the Singapore Marina Bay Sands, its distinctive triple towers crowned by that impossible sky park. Emma's analysis of its digital twin revealed subtle alterations in the structural data, changes that would be meaningless to most observers but formed a kind of digital key when properly decoded. Each subsequent building would require the key from the previous one to unlock its secrets. Rachel volunteered to document this new phase of the investigation, seeing it as a natural extension of her work exploring the boundaries between physical and digital art. Her husband's expertise in historical architecture proved crucial as we began to understand the pattern in Marcus's chosen buildings. Each one represented a different architectural movement, from classical to postmodern, creating a timeline of humanity's relationship with built space. What we discovered in those digital twins went far beyond stolen art. Marcus had created a new kind of artistic medium, one that existed in the space between physical architecture and digital representation. Each building's data contained fragments of classical artworks he'd stolen, but they were transformed, merged with the building's structural elements to create something entirely new. It was vandalism and innovation, destruction and creation, all at once. The hunt took us from Singapore to Dubai's Burj Khalifa, from the Sydney Opera House to the ancient stones of Petra. At each site, Sarah and I worked to understand the engineering principles Marcus had twisted to his purposes, while Emma and Diana decoded the digital layers of his scheme. Rachel documented everything, her work increasingly blurring the lines between documentation and artistic interpretation. But it was the 12th building that changed everything. The coordinates led us to a seemingly unremarkable office tower in downtown Boston, the first building I had ever worked on as a junior engineer 15 years ago. In its digital twin, we found something unexpected. Proof that Marcus had been watching me long before Rachel entered my life, before the Griffin Gallery, before any of us knew his name. The building's original plans, which I had helped create, had been subtly modified to include hidden spaces similar to those we would later discover in Marcus's other schemes. He had used my early work as a template for his own deceptions, studying my engineering solutions and perverting them to his purposes. In a twisted way, I had been his unwitting mentor. This discovery forced me to re-evaluate everything I thought I knew about my connection to Marcus's world. Had Rachel been targeted because of her own potential, or had she been chosen because of her eventual connection to me? Had my entire career in historical renovation been subtly influenced by Marcus's manipulation of the projects that came my way? Sarah found me late one night in our home office, surrounded by old project files and digital models, searching for other instances where my work might have been co-opted. She didn't try to pull me away or tell me I was being paranoid. Instead, she sat down at her own computer and began helping me analyze the data, bringing her academic rigor to my intuitive suspicions. Emma, showing wisdom beyond her 17 years, pointed out something we had all missed. Marcus's puzzle wasn't just about the art or the buildings or even the technology. It was about legacy. By entwining his work with mine, he had ensured that his story would always be part of my story, that any success I had in preserving and protecting buildings would be shadowed by the knowledge of how those same principles could be subverted. But Gerald offered a different perspective. In his view, Marcus's elaborate digital construct was both a confession and an attempt at redemption. By revealing how thoroughly he had studied and adapted my work, he was acknowledging the value of what I had tried to build, not just physically, but ethically. His message wasn't just a challenge. It was an attempt to show that he had understood the principles I stood for, even as he chose to subvert them. As we approached the final buildings in Marcus's sequence, Diana's monitoring systems detected increased activity in the digital art world. Collectors and criminals alike seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would emerge from this elaborate puzzle. The pressure to complete the sequence before someone else decoded it grew with each passing day. Then came the message that changed everything. A simple email from an anonymous account, containing only an image. A recent photograph of Marcus, standing in front of a building we all recognized, one that wasn't on his list of 20. He was in Shanghai, and he was waiting The building in the photograph was the Shanghai Tower, the world's second tallest structure. Its distinctive glass facade twisted toward the sky like a massive double helix, its form representing the marriage of cutting-edge engineering and artistic vision. It was no accident that Marcus had chosen this location for what would surely be our final confrontation. Sarah immediately began making arrangements to travel to Shanghai, but I stopped her. This part of the journey, I knew, I needed to face alone. She understood, though she insisted on having Diana set up a sophisticated monitoring system to track my movements within the building. Emma, in a moment that made me realize how much she'd grown, added her own layer of security by creating a blockchain-based dead man's switch that would release all our findings to global authorities if anything went wrong. Rachel surprised us all by announcing she was coming to Shanghai regardless of my wishes. Her reasoning was simple and irrefutable. This was her story too, and she needed to see it through to the end. Her husband would stay behind with their daughter, coordinating with Sarah and Diana from Boston. The flight to Shanghai gave me time to reflect on the strange journey that had led to this moment. In my carry-on bag was a small USB drive containing the combined data from the 19 buildings we decoded. Each piece had revealed not just stolen art but fragments of Marcus's philosophy, his twisted perspective on authenticity and ownership in the digital age. Together, they told the story of a man who saw himself not as a criminal, but as an artist working in the medium of deception itself. We arrived in Shanghai during the golden hour, when the setting sun turned the city's forest of skyscrapers into pillars of fire. Rachel and I checked into separate hotels, maintaining the pretense that we were ordinary tourists. That evening, as I stood at my window looking out at the Shanghai Tower, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., observation deck. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the tower's upper floors lost in low clouds. Rachel positioned herself in a coffee shop across the street, her camera equipment disguised as tourist gear. Diana's team monitored the building's security feeds from Boston, while Emma tracked the digital signatures of every device on the tower's network. The observation deck was eerily empty when I arrived, though the building's systems showed it as fully booked. Marcus had obviously arranged for privacy. He stood at the windows, looking out over the city, his reflection ghosted against the backdrop of clouds. 10 years had added gray to his hair, but none to his confidence. What followed wasn't the confrontation I'd expected. Instead of gloating or threatening, Marcus began explaining his grand design with the enthusiasm of a proud artist at a gallery opening. The stolen art, the digital twins, the elaborate puzzle. They were all part of what he called his masterpiece of metamodernism. He had created a new form of art that existed simultaneously in physical and digital space, using stolen masterpieces as raw material for something he believed transcended traditional concepts of ownership and authenticity. But as he spoke, I noticed something odd about his reflection in the glass. It flickered slightly, almost imperceptibly. That's when I realized the Marcus standing before me was a sophisticated hologram, likely projected from multiple points around the observation deck. The real Marcus was somewhere else in the building, watching. Rachel, observing through her telephoto lens from across the street, confirmed my suspicion. She'd spotted unusual equipment installations on the floor above us. But before we could act on this information, every screen in the observation deck lit up simultaneously. On them appeared images of all 20 buildings in Marcus's puzzle, their digital twins overlaid on their physical forms, creating a dizzying blend of real and virtual architecture. Marcus's voice came through the building's sound system, explaining that he had just initiated what he called the dissolution, a program that would gradually corrupt the digital twins of all 20 buildings, degrading their data in what he considered a new form of entropy-based art. The only way to stop it would be to complete his puzzle with the correct key, a key he claimed was hidden in plain sight in the Shanghai Tower itself. The implications were staggering. Without their digital twins, these buildings would lose critical maintenance and security data, potentially endangering thousands of lives. Marcus had turned his art piece into a hostage situation, with some of the world's most important structures at risk. But there was something else in his voice, something that reminded me of Gerald's perspective on the puzzle. This wasn't just about the art or the buildings. It was about legacy, about the relationship between creation and destruction, between physical permanence and digital ephemera. As I stood there, watching the digital degradation begin on the screens around me, I realized that Marcus had given me exactly what I needed to stop him. In his desire to prove his brilliance, to show how thoroughly he had studied my work, he had revealed his own weakness. The key wasn't hidden in the Shanghai Tower. It was hidden in my original building designs that he had modified all those years ago. Working quickly, I contacted Emma back in Boston. She was already ahead of me, having detected a pattern in the degrading digital twins that matched modifications found in my first building project. Marcus hadn't just studied my work. He had based his entire encryption system on the structural solutions I developed as a young engineer. Every unorthodox choice I'd made to solve complex engineering problems had become part of his digital key. Sarah, analyzing the data from MIT, discovered something even more startling. The degradation program wasn't actually destroying the digital twins. It was transforming them. Each building's data was being rewritten into a new form that combined elements of all the stolen artworks with the building's structural information. Marcus wasn't just destroying. He was creating something entirely new, using my engineering principles as his artistic medium. Rachel, still watching from across the street, captured the moment when the Shanghai Tower's own digital twin began to transform. Through her lens, she saw the holographic Marcus smile as the building's data representation started shifting, its perfect digital replica beginning to morph into something that straddled the line between architecture and art. But there was a fatal flaw in Marcus's grand design. In basing his encryption on my early work, he had inadvertently given me the power to not just stop his program, but to reshape it. Emma found the vulnerability, a small but crucial error in how he had interpreted one of my structural solutions. It was the kind of mistake only another engineer would recognize, and it gave us a way into his system. Working with Sarah and Emma, I began to modify the degradation program's code. Instead of letting it corrupt or transform the digital twins, we could use it to strengthen them, creating a new kind of architectural database that would make buildings safer and more resilient. Marcus had wanted to turn architecture into art. We could turn his art back into something that would protect and preserve. Diana's monitoring system suddenly detected movement on the tower's maintenance floors. The real Marcus was trying to escape, having realized we were subverting his program. But Gerald, who had arrived in Shanghai quietly the day before, was waiting at the building's service exit. After a decade of watching his son destroy things, he finally had the chance to stop him. The confrontation between father and son wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of trying to run, Marcus broke down. All the elaborate schemes, the stolen art, the digital puzzles, they had been attempts to prove himself to his father, to show that he could create something as lasting and meaningful as the Chen family's legitimate art legacy. In the end, his greatest deception had been the one he played on himself. Rachel documented the moment with a single photograph. Marcus and Gerald, silhouetted against the Shanghai dawn, the tower's transformed digital twin visible on screens behind them like a ghost of what might have been. It would later become the centerpiece of her exhibition, Digital Ghosts, Art in the Age of Virtual Reality. The aftermath unfolded over several months. Marcus went back to prison, but this time with a different purpose. He worked with cybersecurity experts to protect cultural institutions from the kind of attacks he had once orchestrated. The stolen artworks were returned, each now accompanied by a digital record of its journey through his elaborate scheme. Gerald transformed his foundation's mission, focusing on the intersection of art preservation and digital technology. The encryption system Marcus had created, once modified by our team, became a new standard for protecting architectural data. Sarah led the academic study of its implications, publishing papers that would help shape the future of digital architecture. Emma, inspired by the experience, decided to pursue a double major in structural engineering and computer science at MIT. Her insights into the relationship between physical and digital architecture had opened up new possibilities that neither field had fully explored before. Diana found her own kind of redemption, working with museums to develop better systems for tracking and verifying digital art. Her understanding of both traditional art fraud and cybercrime made her uniquely qualified to protect cultural heritage in an increasingly virtual world. As for Rachel and me, our shared experience with Marcus's final scheme helped us find a new kind of closure. The betrayals and pain of the past were transformed, like the digital twins, into something different, not erased, but reconstructed into a foundation for understanding and forgiveness. 10 years after Shanghai, I stood in the Museum of Modern Art, looking at Rachel's photograph of Marcus and Gerald. Sarah squeezed my hand as Emma excitedly explained to her younger siblings how the digital transformation program had worked. Our youngest, now 7, asked if the buildings in the picture were real or just computer games. The answer, I realized, was both and neither. Just like Marcus's great deception had been both a crime and a creation. Gerald joined us at the exhibition, moving more slowly now but still sharp as ever. He pointed out details in Rachel's photographs that others might miss. The way the digital transformations echoed classical artistic techniques, how Marcus had hidden messages in the very artifacts of digital compression. In his son's criminal masterpiece, he had finally found something to be proud of, even if he could never approve of the methods. The last photograph in the exhibition was one I hadn't seen before. Rachel had captured me at the Shanghai Tower observation deck. Reflected in the windows, my image overlaid with the degrading digital twin display. In the reflection, it was impossible to tell where the real structure ended and the digital art began. The plaque beneath it read simply, "The engineers reply, 2035, in every act of destruction, there is an opportunity for creation." Looking at that photo, I finally understood what Marcus had been trying to prove all along. In architecture, as in life, our greatest achievements often come from the ways we choose to rebuild after things fall apart. The foundations we save, the structures we strengthen, and the beauty we find in the process of reconstruction. These are the true measures of our legacy. Sarah's latest project, a revolutionary green building in Dubai, would incorporate lessons learned from Marcus's scheme, using advanced digital twin technology to create structures that could adapt and evolve over time. Emma was developing new algorithms for protecting architectural data, building on the encryption system we discovered in Shanghai. Even our youngest had started playing with architectural design games, creating impossible buildings that straddled the line between digital dreams and physical reality. Life, like architecture, is ultimately about the spaces we create. Not just the physical ones of steel and stone, but the emotional and digital spaces where we connect, create, and sometimes even heal. Marcus's greatest gift, ironically, had been showing us how these spaces intersect, and how the lines between destruction and creation, between digital and physical, between past and future, are never as clear as we think. Rachel's final photograph in the series captured this perfectly. The Shanghai Tower at sunrise, its physical form reflected in a puddle of rain, its digital twin ghosting across a screen, and in the foreground, a small girl, my daughter, looking up at both versions with wonder, unable to tell which was more real, and understanding that maybe it didn't matter. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.